Upon first impression, Final Fantasy XVI struck me with its darker, more violent tone. It's not just in the graphic depictions of bloody battles or godlike beings crushing each other to a pulp, but in the explicit narrative threads about persecution and enslavement. Death and destruction also follows in the wake of all the political and supernatural drama, and the brutality inflicted upon its victims is laid bare at nearly every turn, sometimes to the point of embellishment. There's a thematic coherence to it all, however, melding what happens at the ground level with the monumental, fantastical elements. And within that harsh exterior is a gripping story about characters clinging onto their humanity, the bonds that give them strength, and the lengths they'll go to make the world a better place, as told in a way only Final Fantasy can. This has always been a franchise about reinvention, and in perhaps its most dramatic shift yet, the combat system veers much closer to a Devil May Cry than a Final Fantasy XV or VII Remake, but it's a shining example of what an action RPG can be. Icon battles initially seem like just bombastic set pieces, but grow into meaningful battles that are narratively driven and utterly impressive spectacles. Through the awe-inspiring battles and emotional cutscenes, I found myself repeatedly asking myself in disbelief, did this game just do this? Final Fantasy XVI is filled with these profound moments that were further seared into my memory by the soundtrack's beautiful melodies. But those peaks also come alongside dated design conventions that stick out like sore thumbs, making for some noticeable lulls in my 50+ hours. Still, I'll always remember Final Fantasy XVI for its powerful and stunning moments, for those are the reasons that it stands among the franchise's best.
Come, Ifrit. Show me who you truly are.
Despite the story setup's emphasis on the nations and political structures of Valisthea, Final Fantasy XVI is very much about the growth of main protagonist Clive and the people around him. It's a world plagued by environmental decay, and war is fueled by the hunger for resources, which in this case are the crystals. Because they're this catch-all magical resource, those with the inherent ability to wield magic are abused, subjugated, and treated as property, tools to serve their nation. Thus, liberation and uprising are the narrative through lines, and Final Fantasy XVI heavily leans into these core themes, using it as a strong foundation to build every facet of the story and its characters. It mostly navigates these themes with a deft hand. Its writing often demonstrates an understanding of the complex dynamics that come with the territory. It shines by empowering its characters, letting them be the focal points through sharp cutscenes and dialogue. As heinous as the game's darkest moments may be, those are crucial to each character's understanding of the hostile world they exist in. It's encouraging to see the game plainly say what needs to be said, though at times that deft hand turns heavy, laying it on a bit too thick or foregoing some of the nuance that could have gone a long way. On rare occasions, I ran into things that undermine the rather clear messages the game tries to send, but as the main motivation for the cast and me as the player, the themes that compel characters to take action remain convincing throughout, and this results in great narrative payoffs. Clive and his brother Joshua are caught up in all this because they belong to a royal family that inherits the power of Phoenix, one of the icons that shake up the power struggle within Valisthea. Tragedy strikes their family early on, setting the story in motion and establishing just how important the dominants are, the select few who can transform into icons, or rather, weapons of mass destruction. This blending of political drama, social injustice, and the fantastical tropes of Final Fantasy gives the story room to have the mythical bombast expected of the series, but also make it meaningful. Embedded in the themes of rebellion and the displays of godlike power are strong personal stories of revenge and redemption. Atonement is another important lens through which you see characters develop and go through the process of redistinguishing what's right and wrong. Sometimes this means foregoing their privileges, making immeasurable sacrifices, or defying their supposed fate. For all its dark turns, Final Fantasy XVI is also a story about love in the various forms it can take. It's a beautiful and honest tale of brotherhood, a familial love that cuts deep. There's also a few romantic plot lines that flow naturally into what motivates particular characters, and deep friendships that get established. It wouldn't be a Final Fantasy without the power of human bonds manifesting as the strength to carry on and giving its characters a world worth fighting for.
But Clive, I will say this. You You're not a monster. You're the same man you've always been. Accept that, and you may yet escape your fate.
My fate.
These more granular themes work so well because whether it's Clive, Joshua, Sid, Jill, or any of the key characters, their personalities are driven by inspired voice performances. And when each of them rise to the occasion in their most critical moments, you can damn well hear it in their delivery.
I'm a monster! And I deserve to die! So end it! End it now! Please! Please! Ah!
I reckon I can take you, if that's what you want. But first, I thought I'd give you the benefit of my timeless wisdom.
A significant part of what had me so invested in Final Fantasy XVI is the stylish action combat, since it's so tightly tied to the game's identity. While you only control Clive throughout the game, his roster of icon abilities build up alongside story events, and the framing of his greatest battles works so well because he controls like a nimble, masterful swordsman with a slew of badass powers he can whip out and string together at any moment. The game loosely retains the design principles of an RPG with skill trees, a leveling system, upgradable gear, and stats that create a sense of progression. But when you're in combat, your handling of Clive's technical capabilities and icon powers are what'll win the battle. You can equip 3 icons and swap between them on the fly. Each has 2 powers on cooldown and a unique feat that you can execute at any time. Customizing and mapping out your icon abilities is key, and because these abilities all have properties such as launching, mid-air execution, charge-ups, or area of effect damage, you can get creative with some sweet combos. The more you inspect the nuances of how certain abilities can be strung together, the more you'll see the ways you can execute sequences akin to complex attack rotations. Brilliantly designed boss battles bring out the best in the stylish action combat. Typically, you work to bring down their stagger meter, then hit them with all you got once they're staggered, carefully planning your attack sequence to make the most of the damage multiplier, similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake. But these bosses also challenge your skills in dodging, positioning, reading incoming attacks, and reacting with precision and swiftness. As someone who has a couple thousand hours in Final Fantasy XIV and regularly does Savage raids, I can clearly see how the MMORPG's boss mechanics have influenced Final Fantasy XVI. It's one of the development team's many strengths, and I'm thrilled to see those design philosophies cross over to enrich the experience. Final Fantasy XVI isn't a complex game per se, as it's structured pretty straightforward. You have a home base called the Hideaway, and somewhat sparse hub areas for each region that gradually open up as you make progress, and side quests populate these areas and flesh out the world. Once you get access to the hunt board, you'll find optional boss fights within these regions that reward you with materials for better gear, a bunch of XP, and a satisfying challenge. But the main quest is primarily driven by distinct combat-focused scenarios akin to a linear dungeon where mobs of enemies are interspersed with a handful of boss fights. Not only do these contain some of the best story moments and cutscenes, but it's where the gameplay finds its groove, hitting an enjoyable cadence of spectacular fights. Side quests are, unfortunately, one of Final Fantasy XVI's weaker parts. Having done them all, I would go as far to say that a handful of them are critical for getting the full picture of key characters and their relationships. But outside of a few important ones, they're mostly comprised of stilted dialogue sequences with objectives that rarely make the most of the game's strengths. It's where the writing occasionally falls flat too, so the contrast in quality is stark when Final Fantasy XVI has best-in-class storytelling in its main quest. Where the game flexes the hardest though, is in the icon versus icon battles. Pivotal moments where fully transformed dominants put everything on the line and fight with everything they got. There aren't many of these boss fights, but the ones from around the halfway point up until the end make for some of the wildest, most impressive spectacles seen in video games. New powers specific to these battles open up as the game goes on too, so it's not all QuickTime events or glorified button mashing. And even when they do rely on QTEs, you get a purely ridiculous display of strength that would make Asura's Wrath proud. I'm not easily wooed by fancy cinematics or super high visual fidelity, but Final Fantasy XVI is one case where that technical prowess accentuates the grand scale of these genuinely surprising and unforgettable moments. And whether it's the heated battles, emotional cutscenes, or brief treks across Valisthea, it wouldn't be a Final Fantasy game without the evocative soundtrack to match. Composer Masayoshi Soken and his team are a significant part of what makes Final Fantasy XIV so special, and their work on Final Fantasy XVI further proves that the series' music is in good hands. Wistful reverberating piano pieces, commanding orchestras and choirs, even electronic tunes and heavy guitars all somehow fit into a cohesive soundtrack. Even the normal boss theme had me sitting up straight, shoulders squared, humming along as I whooped on my foes with confidence. And the evocative melodies that become powerful leitmotifs capture feelings that are tough to put into words. Music is integral to the storytelling in Final Fantasy, and 16 is a masterful execution of this part of the series' tradition. So when I hear the new renditions of the Crystal Prelude and the original Final Fantasy theme, I look back at the franchise's rich history and realize just how much of an impact it's made on me and countless others. There are eras of my life that have been defined by Final Fantasy games and my connection to them. Having seen this new entry all the way through, I'm happy to include it alongside some of my all-time favorites in the series. Its approach to both storytelling and gameplay is bold for the franchise, expanding the definition of what a mainline entry could be. It may fall short in some respects, but it should be celebrated for how it delivers its most stunning moments. Where it mattered most, Final Fantasy XVI succeeds and earns its place within the Final Fantasy pantheon as one of the great entries, and does so on its own terms.